Welcome to the Advantage Podcast, a monthly unscripted conversation with host David Ashcraft and top leaders impacting our world. Created by pastors for pastors to strengthen our leadership and expand our knowledge and influence.
Hey, well, Craig, thank you for joining me. This is actually the first podcast that we are doing with our Pennsylvania pastors. And so just so you know who you're talking to, we've got about 80 of the largest churches in Pennsylvania. Their senior pastors are joining us with some cohorts and just talking about how do we get Jesus to the people of Pennsylvania. So that's actually who's on this call. So thank you for jumping on with me. I appreciate it very much.
Hey, you bet. I'm honored to be with some of the best and most effective in Pennsylvania. So let's dive in.
Very good. So, Craig, you and I are a part of something, the Global Leadership Network, where it really is all about building leaders and saying, how do we help leaders excel in their roles, specifically even in churches as pastors? And so I thought maybe let's talk a little bit about leadership. And just so you know, what I would love for this conversation is to be not so much scripted, but more just if you and I are in the back hallway talking, then how would you answer some of these questions? How do you think? And what I'm really wanting to do is kind of get in your head and say, how do you think about these particular situations? I think that would be a real asset for our pastors. And so let's talk leaders specifically. And, you are somebody that excels as a leader. You've got leaders all around you. But my guess is it didn't always happen that way when you started at Life.Church. And so if you could go back to the beginning, what did you do? How did you pull leaders around you? And how did you even look for leaders? What were you looking for when it came to leaders at Life.Church?
Well, we started kind of like you did. You didn't have much when you started at LCBC, and we didn't have a single staff member. We didn't have anybody in any formal leadership role at all. And so, honestly, at the time, I was looking for availability, which was not the best standard of leadership. And so I made a lot of what I would consider to be kind of leadership mistakes early on, and my ability to recognize quality and gifted leadership and recognize potential in people kind of grew along with the ministry. So in the early years, I wasn't great at it. In fact, I had to really replace every single first role that I brought in from, kids ministry, student ministry, what we would have called an executive pastor back then, my assistant, person who worked with the finances and such. So every first role, I did not succeed in bringing on the best. What I did start to learn,
Craig, I would imagine early days, you're just taking warm bodies. You're just taking who can we get, who's willing to be here, who's committed.
Unfortunately, I was 28 years old and desperate, and so made a lot of desperate decisions. But what I did learn over time, some principles that are kind of timeless. I learned one of the best indicators of future success is past success. So I started to look for people who have not even necessarily having big success, but led something, anything, might have been a president of their French club, or was a captain of a sports team. I started to look for qualities once we were able to kind of hone in on what our values were organizationally, and in kind of work values. I started looking for people that were coachable, people that were flexible, had similar values, people that were asked a lot of questions, people that were resilient, people had a good work ethic and things like that. And so I was then started to search more for values, and then that's when our selection process started to improve.
So how did you had that first band of people that maybe weren't the right ones. How did you move them on? I mean, that's got to be awkward conversations where you're saying, or did they figure it out themselves, or did you have to go to them and say, you're not the guy anymore?
No, unfortunately, that I had to learn by telling most of them they weren't going to make it. And that's often what happens in any growing group. And that is there are some team leaders that grow with you and some that don't. The good news is the next round we brought in, did work. And so our growth trajectory was fortunately on the faster side. But now I've got a group of people that have been with me for 26 years, and our top leaders. So the conversations were not easy. And that was another thing I learned. Most of what I learned was by doing it poorly, but I learned how to transition people in a way that's more healthy for them and for us over time as well. So basically, if you want to learn from my first 2 years of leadership, I could only give you mistakes and hardly anything we did right.
But Craig, it's interesting in those early days because I remember as we were getting started with LCBC and we would have people show up and I would kind of moan to Ruth and say, they're not the people I want or need long term. But she would say, but they're here and
Mhm.
God gave them to you here for this moment. And, you struggle with, am I using people or did God bring these people here for a period of time? And so how did you struggle with that and think, am I just using people in this slot, or was that ever an issue for you thinking through that?
I never felt like I was using them because when I put them there, I felt good about them going in, and
Yeah,
then sometimes quickly I'd realize it wasn't necessarily the right person, or maybe I wasn't the right leader. So, I can't put it all on them, but I didn't feel like I didn't put him in there with any kind of ulterior motives of saying I
right.
want to take advantage of you, but I did feel really badly about it costing some of them career-wise, personally, financially,
Yeah.
and we always tried to do it as well as we could and make it right with them, but you never enjoy a painful transition.
Well, and it's always hard when you're asking people from your church that are somehow sold out on the mission to leave their career in another field, step into
Right,
your role. And when that doesn't work, you don't just lose the person, you lose their family, their friends, everybody else.
right,
So it costs a
right.
lot.
And that's something you bring up on a kind of a side note is, do you hire from within or do you bring people from the outside? And that's a good question that I'm guessing some of your, pastors on the call would be asking, and one of the things I kinda started to learn, and these are not hard and fast rules, but if you love your culture, then bringing up from within is often the wisest thing to do. If you're in a culture that's not healthy, then sometimes bringing people from the outside is actually better.
Yeah.
So that's, depending on where you are in your tenure of leadership, those are some things to think through.
And I know, Craig, for us, I would always say, okay, we want to hire people that are experts, but we didn't have the money to hire experts at that point. So you'd look for the skills or the potential in somebody to say, I want them to become an expert down the road. And
Mhm,
my challenge always to staff when I bring them on is you become so good at this that people from around the country are going to come and ask questions about how you're doing it. But
mhm.
we never could hire people at that stage early
Right.
on anyway. So,
Right, and I like that too, that if you can hire potential and then you all grow together, what happens, and you had this as well, you know, my team was growing with me, meaning I was not the leader I am today, didn't have the knowledge,
right.
experience, and so we developed a common vocabulary. We had certain experiences that are shared experiences. If someone comes in today, they don't have the benefit or the blessing of that common learning in the early years, and so
Yeah.
that's a really rich time.
Yeah, that's good. So one of the things that's fascinating to me, Craig, looking at you guys at Life.Church, and I see this in other churches that have done well, is now looking back, you've got a team that's been with you for 20, 25 years,
Mhm,
and they all seem like they're sharp. They all seem like they're experts. And so I look and go, so how, when you were a small church, did you have that collection of experts? And you may have just answered that question. All of you grew together, you developed, you weren't experts when you started, but somebody from the outside looking in goes, well, sure, he's got all these experts on his team. No wonder they've done well, but they
mhm.
weren't experts when you hired them.
No, no, so let's take the 3 team members I have with me that serve on our directional leadership team. There's Bobby Grunwald, who created the YouVersion Bible app and is over technology and a lot of other things. There's Jerry Hurley, who, is over, HR and, about half the organization. There's Sam Roberts, who is, over all of our campuses. So those 3 people, when I met them, Jerry, we had about 200 people coming in the church when we brought him on. Sam, we probably had about 225 people coming to church when we brought him on. Bobby, we had about 700 people in the church coming when we brought him on. And so our top leaders, we found them in a pond or a pool of less than 1,000 people. And so
Yeah,
now we often say, like, where are the future Bobbies, Jerry's, Sam's in a church with tens of thousands? Why can't we find them? And the answer is because they are undeveloped, meaning they are there and there would be hundreds of them likely if we would find that 25, 27, 30-year old and help develop them. And so they're entering at a different point, but the reality is, and then, like, to be real honest with you, they were not great when I brought them on. Jerry came in, he was a district manager for Target, so he oversaw 11 Target stores, and he was a ministry wreck. He was all business, and
mm,
everything was quick,
mm,
fast, sharp, harsh, with no ministry finesse. So I didn't know if he was going to make it. Over
Yeah.
time, he became incredibly pastoral, one of the most pastoral guys on staff, and he took his business expertise and helped a young pastor grow in organizational understanding. So they weren't great. I wasn't great. We just all had potential and work to develop each other. And it does take time. It's really hard to hire the best from the outside. You can't afford them. You can't get them. So
Yeah.
as often as you can, developing the best from the inside is a great plan. It's just not a fast one.
So, Craig, I listen to guys all the time, and they'll talk about their staff or their team, and they're frustrated with their staff, don't feel like they're the right guys. Almost what you just described with some of your team, where they weren't great when you started. And so the temptation is to just assume you've got the wrong person, to bail out on them. And so you talked about developing yourself, but developing the team.
Mhm.
How did you decide it was worth developing them? Or was it even a decision? Did you have a choice and you just you had them and you were stuck with them? Or what would you say to guys that have people on their team that they're frustrated, but maybe they ought to be working harder to develop them as opposed to
Mhm.
bailing out and looking for the perfect person from the outside?
Yeah, that's a great question, as often as possible, if we can help the people with us succeed, that's best for everybody because transition is costly. It's the you can lose some trust, you can hurt a lot of people, and I would always rather salvage and help a current team member succeed than I would replace them. That said, when it becomes obvious that they're not going to make it, you have to be honest and make a real fair decision. Because if they're not the right person here, then that also means God wants them somewhere else, and you have to just be real clear about that. So what I would say is this: when someone's not succeeding, we often tend to blame that person, and there's often underlying reasons that may not be the person's fault. For example, they may be under resourced, they may be underdeveloped. They may be in the wrong role. Like they're actually a very talented and capable person, but we put them in the wrong role. They may have a personal issue going on that if we knew about, we could actually help them with, but we don't know about. We haven't asked about it, and that's keeping them from playing at their best. So what we want to do is we really want to try to discern not just, hey, they're not doing a great job, but what's the why behind it. There are times when it's because we haven't developed them, meaning there is more potential in them. And so if we can kind of get a little bit deeper, ask a lot of questions, kind of hear what's going on there, then we can determine how do we develop them. And what's interesting is we all have kind of a developmental style, but other people have different ways that they like to be developed. And so we have to really get into what is the best way to coach this person, what kind of opportunities help create growth, what is it where they feel shamed or discouraged, and learn. In sports you don't coach all the positions the same way. You have to have a little different philosophy. So we have to become experts at where they are, what motivates them, what they're afraid of, what's holding them back, are they in the right place? And it takes time. It's never a science. We never can get it always right. That's why there's got to be the relational equity matters so much. Love covers a multitude of sins. If we really care about them genuinely, and they're not there just to serve our vision, but we want to help fulfill their mission and ministry, then we can get to a good place. But we have to really, really, really care about them and not just care about them helping do what we want to be done. Does that make sense?
Yeah. But so that all sounds like a hassle. It sounds
It
like a
is.
lot of work. It sounds like a lot of time and
It is a
energy.
lot of work. It's a lot of work, and it doesn't always succeed, and
I was
it's
gonna say, have you had times when it didn't work and you put in a lot of effort?
1,000%. Yes, yeah, I mean, and it's heartbreaking, and sometimes the ones you work the hardest on are the ones that end up failing the most miserably at the end, and so that's sometimes the difference between a great organization and one that's pretty good, is that the hard developing leadership conversations. And I would just say this: if you're not having difficult conversations right now with people, you're not developing them. Period.
Yeah.
And if you don't have a lot of people, I call it the back porch conversation. Back in the day when I developed everybody, which I don't now, um, almost every great leader had a back porch conversation with me. And that was on my back porch after hours saying, look, if things don't change, you're not going to make it. Here's what needs to happen. And they were almost to the breaking point. And so the best grow through the breaking point. Not everybody does. And
Yeah.
so if you find yourself having a lot of conversations like that, don't be afraid. Don't feel like you're failing. That's the most intimate, meaningful point of leadership development. And I'm telling you, 100%, every single one of our best top leaders, and there are dozens of them, they had their own version of a back porch developmental conversation almost to the breaking point. And that's you have to get through those points to really grow. You have to cry about where you fell short, and you have to have aha moments about what you didn't see. And then as a leader, I have to do the same thing, meaning I have to recognize, oh, well, I didn't give you the right chance, or I didn't give you the right feedback, or I didn't listen when you were trying to tell me.
Yeah.
And so it's on all of us. And as leaders, if we don't have our own kind of breakthrough moments, we become the lid
Yeah.
over and
Yeah.
over again.
So, Craig, how do you to have those back porch conversations, you have to have enough confidence that you are seeing things right and that it's
Mhm.
not you, it's them. Um, and so for a leader that's struggling confidence wise to say, I think the other person's wrong, or I think they're not measuring up, but how do I know? So how did you ever deal with lack of self-confidence as a leader? I mean, you come off as somebody that seems very self-assured, but were there stages of your life or even today where you kind of go, man, I don't know that I have the confidence that I need?
No, for sure. I mean, there are times when I'll go into what would be a modern day version of the back porch conversation, kind of undecided, meaning I'm not sure. I've got a hunch. And what happens is when you do it longer, you become more intuitive. And people think intuitive is kind of like a squishy little, gut reaction. It's actually not. It's years of looking at patterns, relationships, dynamics, and intuitively you can start to put things together. And so you'll go in with a hunch, but there's a lot of times where you just have to stay a student and say, I could be wrong about this. And
Mm,
so what happens is in most developmental conversations, most leaders do more talking early than they do listening. And if you've got an hour long conversation budgeted or so, you probably should spend, I would say, the first 40 minutes, maybe 45 minutes having the other person talk before you give feedback. And
good.
most leaders, it's the opposite. So we're going to ask, we're going to dig, we're going to try to diagnose, we're going to try to right size, we're going to ask some more, we're going to really get an understanding. And then sometimes the best discovery is not when we tell them, but when we help them discover it.
Yeah.
What would like a question, what would, if you were in my shoes, what would you say to you? That's a great question because you're putting the burden of the solution on them. They're no longer a victim. Now they have to help solve the problem. Okay. So for you to really succeed, what do you need to do differently? And so that puts the ownership on them. You're not telling them, they're discovering. Okay. So how are we going to measure that? What are you okay? So by what time are you going to accomplish that? Okay. And so if you do, what happens? Great. You get promoted. You get to say, if you don't do such and such by such and such time, what do you think should happen? Well, I guess I probably shouldn't keep my job. So at that point, you didn't tell, you led, you help
Yeah.
them discover it, and then they're kind of creating their own path of success or not, and there's some accountability to it. So I find that the best conversations are when I listen more, talk less, and help them discover rather than tell.
That's good. That's good. So the relationship with all these people you've had these conversations with, these back porch, and even you talked about your top three. Sometimes the perception is that we all have to be best friends. And
Mhm.
so what kind of relationship do you have with Bobby and Sam? And is it I always say to our staff, we don't have to be best friends. We all have to like each other, but we don't have to hang out all the time. But do you guys hang out all the time? Are you best friends, or what's the relationship you guys have?
I would say it's a different type of friendship. So Bobby and I, we're both pilots. We fly together, we work out together, we travel together. So so we'll do stuff together with spouses. Jerry and Sam are amongst my closest friends, but we don't hang out.
Mm,
And so it's almost like we don't need to because we have a working, it's not even a working friendship. It's kind of like we're in war together. Like we're war buddies or we're
yeah,
teammates. And so there is a very unique bond. And I'm telling you, like, we got each other's back, but at the same time, we'll get in each other's face too. And so that's, in war, you hold each other accountable and you got each other's backs. And that's kind of the way it is. And so there is a deep trust, massive respect, undying love, but it's not found over dinners,
Yeah.
hanging out or trips together. And it works. You can't. And I've got, a group of, probably 20 top leaders that I'm very close to, but I don't hang out with. And by close to, I mean there is mutual respect and love and care, but it doesn't mean that we do holiday dinners together.
Yeah. And Craig, you've talked, I think, fairly openly, even with your top three guys, as saying you went through a period back in the mid 2000s where you thought it was all going to blow up. So, I mean,
I
you
did.
guys hasn't always been rosy, hasn't always been easy.
No, there were 5 of us then. One of them has since retired, but there were 5 of us, and the truth is, it was kind of 4 against 1. I was the one, and, we were one of the first churches to go to multi-site, and we had probably had 11 or 12 sites then, and we were disagreeing on kind of values, approaches, and so, I would say all 5 of us were in the wrong in some ways, including me. I would kind of undermine what they would say, they would undermine what I would say, and, it got pretty ugly, and we one of the things we learned to do is fight privately, but stand together publicly, and so I mean, when I say we fought it out, it was, slammed doors and not talking for a couple days and really hurt feelings, and, at the end of it, to work through it, what I did, David, is I apologized to them and said, "I'm gonna go first and tell you what I've done wrong, and then I'm gonna ask, 'Can you trust me? If you can trust me, we can move forward. If we can't,'" and I told him very without emotion, um, "Honestly, I started it without you, and I can continue without you, and I have replaced all of you in my mind." Meaning, if we don't, the options are I replace you or you replace me. And none of those seem like good options. The only other thing we can do is we can work together. And so I want to apologize. Here's what I've done. Will you trust me? And at that point, it was kind of like a real, we're supposed to be Jesus followers. Everybody was like real Jesus followers in that moment. There was repentance and prayer and forgiveness and worship. And then almost immediately the staff could sense it, but there was division, and where there's division, there's not unity, and you can't build anything. And I would say too, in order to have a special team, you're gonna have to work through some times like that. There is
Yeah.
no such thing as a 20-year run without 2 or 3 or 4, bumps in the road. I would say too, probably every 5 to 7 years, there will be some kind of organizational dysfunction, disagreement. If you're growing, you have to make changes, and so don't let those rattle you, just expect them. They are a part of good leadership, and if you can endure them and stay together, many don't, but if you can, you got something really special.
And I think it's amazing you guys have gone through those organizational changes. We did at LCBC as well. I would say 7, 8 times over 30 years we
Yes. Yep.
reorganized, but
Yes.
it was the same leaders for the most part at the top all of the
Mhm.
time. And
Mhm.
it's fun when they can make that transition. I would also say, Craig, what I've experienced stepping away from LCBC made me realize how much I love working with teams and
Mhm.
getting the right people around you. And there's just something special about it when you go through those battles and you come through the other side and you can still function together. It's special.
There is. There's a bond, and you don't always get it right together, but when you fail together, you learn together, and, you own it together, and so you're right. I would say as often as you can, work to keep the unity of the team. If you do have a toxic team member, if you've got dysfunction, if you can't, you have to make the change, and the fear is, it's going to be harder than you can endure. And once you make the change, almost every time, I think you would probably agree, David, on the back end, you go, man, we should have done that earlier. Because
Yeah,
when you
exactly.
remove someone that's not with you or is hurting the culture, it's amazing how immediate there is a sense of relief, positivity, reunification of the team. It's just, I always think, why did I wait so long? I should have done it earlier.
Exactly. No, that's good. One other question I'll ask you real quick. At what point, as you were working with other leaders, when did you realize you had some leadership skills as well? I mean, I would assume you knew you were a leader kind of as you started, but probably nothing to what you have developed to become. And so, at what point did you ever reach a point where you go, oh, maybe I've got some potential here, or does it just morph over time?
I would say I'm gonna answer it a couple of ways. There were a couple of times. One time we did our first church merge, and there was the most significant church in town back in 1999. I did a meeting before them, and they were kind of hostile. And within a short period of time, I led them from being hostile to an 89.6% vote to do this. And I stepped back and realized, wait a minute, that wasn't me. That was something that was inside me I didn't know God had put there. So that was a real humbling moment. And even I had a little bit of a sense of reverence, like if I don't use this wisely, it could be dangerous. So that was a sense of me being able to move a room. Outside of that, David, I would say this: I don't think I've grown in my leadership confidence. In fact, I was probably naively confident and shouldn't have been. I probably had kind of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I thought I was better than I was. The longer I do this, the less confident I am in me, and the more confident I am in we.
Yeah,
Meaning,
interesting.
I am only as good as the people around me, and I am fantastic when I have great people around me,
Yeah.
and I am not very good when I don't have good people around me. So my confidence has grown not in my ability, but in our ability, and it's just biblical. It's the body of Christ working together. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't stand before God with a little greater responsibility. So I'm always aware
Yeah.
of that, but I don't stand there alone either. I've got amazing people around me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think part of what makes churches successful is the staff, the people that you bring around you, and probably the lid that you experience as a team is because of the staff you have around you. So,
And our confidence isn't static. You know, our leadership confidence isn't just up and to the right. In fact, I've talked a little bit when in 2020 when everything went crazy. I lost a lot of leadership confidence. I was second guessing myself and did not lead well. So I would say it's like an athlete, in baseball, you got a guy that hits 400 during some season and can't put, bat on the ball and other times. So your leadership confidence isn't static. It goes up and down. But what you want to do is you want to have just kind of your identity and sense of calling always secured, always settled. And I've learned, when the numbers went down significantly for the first time in 2020, my self-worth, my confidence went down. I've learned to take my confidence out of the results and more into the who than what you see on the
yeah.
outside. And so that was a helpful time to me. But I would just say, to all of your pastors there, they are more successful than most, but they didn't get there alone. I'd say don't hold it tightly, but recognize God has called you to steward something special. So there's always that kind of the tension of it's not because of me, but my role is important, but not that important. But it's just the tension of
Yeah, it's a funny thing because
it
I
is.
tell these guys they are the top pastors in Pennsylvania. They're doing great work. But to your point, it's yeah, we just have to be careful we don't think we're too much
Right.
and get full of ourselves. Craig, one of the things I appreciate about you, I've said this to you before, I think, I'm a big believer in longevity in churches and staying long term. What oftentimes happens as pastors become successful in the world's eyes is they get so busy doing other things they take their eyes off of their church. And
Mhm.
so one of the things I very much appreciate about you is you have kept your eyes very much focused on Life.Church,
Thank you.
and even today you're very focused on Life.Church and its future. And I think that's part of why Life.Church has been successful is because you haven't got distracted, and I think that's a huge thing. And so way to go for that, and appreciate
Thank you.
you. And I would just say to you as well, I would say to the guys, my experience with you is you're the real deal. What we see is who you truly are. And so thank you for leading well at Life.Church. Thank you for representing Jesus and the gospel well, and appreciate your accessibility to other pastors and other leaders. It's encouraging to hear that you struggle, but it's also encouraging to see your wins. And so thank you for sharing those with
Thank
us.
you. And back with you, I just appreciate you continuing to invest in pastors and what's happening, in Pennsylvania is special. There's, the impact and reach that you all have been able to have is fantastic. And back when we did Catalyst One Days, there would be more people from there than any other part of the country, which tells me there's just high spiritual interest in an area where there shouldn't be. So meaning that you guys have been very effective. And I pray that you feel encouraged. It's an honor to work with you on the Global Leadership Network and also to serve pastors. It's just, you're a 20-year friend and let's do 20 more together.
That sounds great. Craig, thank you. Appreciate the time.
Okay, same to you. Take care, Dave.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Advantage Podcast with David Ashcraft and for participating in our goal to strengthen and encourage pastors and their churches so more people are introduced to Jesus across Pennsylvania. If you found this helpful, feel free to pass it along. To find out more about the work of The Advantage, visit our website at theadvantage.org.